Longitude, the true story of a lone genius who solved the greatest scientific problem of his time, by Dava Sobel. Imagine you're there. It's October 22nd, 1707, and the night is suffocating with fog. The sea churns below like a living, breathing beast. An English fleet, fresh from a victorious battle, is trying to find its way home. Admiral Sir Cloudesley Shovel has been navigating through this miserable soup of weather for 12 agonizing days. He's essentially sailing blind, and he knows the coast of England is somewhere nearby, bristling with deadly rocks that could tear his ships apart like paper. So he does what any good commander would do. He calls his navigators together. "Where are we, gentlemen?" They huddle over their charts, run through their calculations, and finally reach a consensus. "Good news, sir. We're safely west of a small island off the French coast. We're in the clear. But there's one ordinary seaman on board who's been keeping his own private records. By his reckoning, the fleet is sailing straight into catastrophe." Now, here's the thing. In the Royal Navy, questioning the navigators isn't just frowned upon. It's considered mutiny, a crime punishable by death. But this sailor is so convinced they're headed for disaster that he risks everything to warn the admiral. Admiral Shovel thanks him by having him hanged on the spot. A few hours later, the admiral's flagship, the Association, slams into the rocks of the Scilly Isles and vanishes beneath the waves in minutes, taking every single soul with it. Before anyone can even comprehend what's happening, 2 more ships are shredded by the same rocks. In one horrific night, 4 warships are destroyed. Nearly 2,000 men drown. The admiral himself washes ashore alive, only to be murdered by a local woman who wants the emerald ring on his finger. So what went wrong? The compass was fine. The seamanship was solid. The fatal error was something invisible. They knew their latitude, their north-south position. That was the easy part. But their longitude, their east-west position, they were completely, catastrophically clueless. For centuries, this was the single most deadly unsolved problem in the world. It haunted every ship's captain and baffled the greatest minds alive. Isaac Newton couldn't crack it. Neither could Galileo or Edmund Halley. The inability to determine longitude at sea had killed more people than most wars, destroyed more wealth than any plague. Whichever nation could solve this puzzle would control the oceans, and with them, the entire world. Today we're diving into Dava Sobel's brilliant book, Longitude. But fair warning, this isn't some dry history of maps and mathematics. This is the story of an underdog who took on an entire empire of elite scientists. A humble carpenter from the English countryside who dared to believe that the answer everyone was seeking in the stars could actually be found in a simple box built with his own hands. By the end of today's journey, you'll understand how one man's obsession with precision changed everything. It's a tale of stubborn persistence, breathtaking ingenuity, and a powerful reminder that sometimes the most brilliant solutions are the ones everyone overlooks because they're too busy chasing complicated ones. This is the story of John Harrison and the invention that conquered the sea. To really grasp the world John Harrison was born into, you need to understand what the ocean was like back then. And honestly, it was absolutely terrifying. Sure, we celebrate the age of exploration with its tales of Columbus, Magellan, and Drake. But the truth is, every single voyage was essentially a roll of the dice. A ship would leave port, and nobody, not even the captain, could say with certainty where they actually were once they lost sight of land. Finding latitude, your north-south position, was relatively straightforward. You could measure the sun's height at noon, or locate the North Star, and boom, you had a reliable reference point. Captains would, quote, sail the parallel, holding a steady line of latitude all the way across an ocean. Columbus himself did exactly that. But longitude, the east-west coordinate, that was a complete nightmare. Here's the thing. The lines of longitude wrapping around our globes are imaginary, human inventions. Latitude has natural anchor points. The equator is a physical reality determined by Earth's rotation. But the prime meridian, that 0-degree line of longitude, that's just an arbitrary line we all decided to agree on. Back then, different mapmakers drew it through Paris, Rome, or Jerusalem. It was completely made up. And this seemingly minor difference is actually the key to understanding the entire problem. Because longitude isn't really about space, it's about time. Think about it this way. Earth rotates 360 degrees in 24 hours. Do the math, and that means every hour Earth spins 15 degrees. So if you know what time it is right where you are, standing on your ship in the middle of nowhere, and you also know what time it is at that exact same moment back at your home port, you can calculate your longitude. For every hour of difference between your ship's time and your home port's time, you've traveled 15 degrees of longitude. Sounds ridiculously simple, right? Today you could do this with 2 cheap drugstore watches. But in the 18th century, it was pure fantasy. The clocks of that era were pendulum clocks. Put one on a rocking ship, and it would speed up, slow down, or just give up entirely. Take a clock from freezing London to the sweltering Caribbean, and the metal parts would expand, the oil would change consistency, and its timekeeping would become a complete disaster. Changes in air pressure, even tiny variations in gravity at different latitudes, could throw everything off. No clock could survive an ocean voyage and keep accurate time. It was considered physically impossible. So the greatest minds in Europe, the astronomers, looked upward instead. They saw the sky as God's perfect clockwork mechanism. The moon, they reasoned, moves across the background stars at a predictable, steady pace. If you could just map the heavens perfectly and predict where the moon would be at a specific time in, say, London, then a sailor anywhere could measure the moon's position from his ship, check his tables, and determine London time. This was called the lunar distance method, and it became the obsession of the entire scientific establishment. Kings and governments poured fortunes into it. They built magnificent observatories in Paris and London, specifically to map stars and track the moon. Giants like Sir Isaac Newton and Edmund Halley staked their reputations on it. To them, the solution to this grand navigational problem had to be equally grand and astronomical. It was logical, it was elegant, it was worthy of their genius. But it was also fantastically, brutally difficult. The moon's orbit is maddeningly complex, and trying to measure the precise angle between the moon and a tiny distant star from the deck of a pitching ship in the middle of the night with 18th century instruments, it was a nightmare. For the average sailor, it was practically impossible. And so the deaths just kept piling up. In 1741, British Commodore George Anson led a fleet around Cape Horn at the southern tip of South America. After battling ferocious storms for nearly 2 months, he believed he'd finally made it into the Pacific Ocean. He set course north for a small island called Juan Fernandez, where his men, dying of scurvy, desperately needed fresh water. But a powerful hidden current had been fighting him the entire time. When the skies finally cleared, he wasn't hundreds of miles into the Pacific. He was still right there at the treacherous coast of Tierra del Fuego. He'd been essentially treading water for weeks. This catastrophic miscalculation of longitude cost him dearly. By the time his ship, the Centurion, finally limped to the island, more than half his original 500-man crew were dead. The problem had become a full-blown crisis, a matter of national security and economic survival. In an act of desperation, the British government passed the Longitude Act of 1714. It created a board of longitude, a panel of experts, and offered a prize of staggering value to anyone who could solve the problem. £20,000, the equivalent of millions today, for a practical method of finding longitude at sea. The announcement unleashed an avalanche of proposals, many of them completely bonkers. One idea involved a, quote, powder of sympathy, supposedly able to heal wounds from a distance. The plan was to send a wounded dog on every ship. Back in London at noon each day, someone would dip a bandage from the dog's wound into the powder. The dog, yelping in sympathetic pain thousands of miles away, would give the captain a perfect time signal. This was the world John Harrison walked into, not with a wounded dog or some convoluted astronomical theory, but with a simple, radical idea. He would build the impossible clock. John Harrison wasn't an astronomer. He wasn't a member of the Royal Society. He was a carpenter from a tiny village in Lincolnshire. Born in 1693, he learned woodworking from his father. But this man had a mind that worked differently. He wasn't just a carpenter. He was a master of materials, a quiet genius obsessed with the mysteries of friction and motion. With zero formal training, he started building clocks. And these weren't ordinary clocks. They were made almost entirely of wood. He used oak for the wheels and self-lubricating tropical hardwoods for parts that would normally need oil. He understood that oil was an enemy of precision because it changes with temperature, so he designed clocks that needed no oil at all. It was an idea no other clockmaker in the world was pursuing. His early clocks were absolute masterpieces. He invented something called the gridiron pendulum. He knew metal pendulum rods expand in heat and contract in cold, making clocks run slow or fast. So he ingeniously combined interwoven strips of two different metals, brass and steel, which expand at different rates. As one expanded, the other counteracted it, keeping the pendulum's length, and therefore its swing, perfectly constant regardless of temperature. He also invented a revolutionary new escapement, the mechanism that gives a clock its tick-tock and controls the release of power. He called it the grasshopper, because its two interlocking levers kicked back and forth like insect legs. It was beautiful, virtually friction-free. Using a neighbor's chimney as a fixed reference point against the night sky, Harrison and his brother James tested their clocks against the stars. The best London watches were losing about a minute a day. Harrison's wooden grandfather clocks were accurate to within a single second per month. He'd built the most precise timekeepers the world had ever seen. And all of this was just preparation. The real challenge, the one burning in his mind, was longitude. In 1730, Harrison, then 37, traveled 200 miles to London with drawings for a new kind of clock, a sea clock. He went to see Dr. Edmund Halley, the Astronomer Royal. Halley was impressed, but he knew the Board of Longitude, packed with astronomers, would be skeptical of a mechanical solution from a country carpenter. He sent Harrison to meet London's most respected clockmaker, George Graham. Harrison was terrified Graham would steal his ideas. But after a 10-hour conversation lasting late into the evening, Graham was astonished. He recognized the genius in Harrison's designs and, instead of stealing them, gave Harrison a generous, interest-free loan to build his machine. For the next 5 years, John Harrison worked. The result was Harrison No. 1, or H1. It wasn't a clock you'd recognize. Weighing 75 pounds and crafted from gleaming brass, it looked, as Dava Sobel beautifully describes, like a model ship escaped from its bottle. It had no pendulum. Instead, it used two massive dumbbell-shaped balances, linked by springs, that swung in opposite directions. The motion of one perfectly canceled out the motion of the other. No matter how a ship pitched or rolled, the heart of the clock remained in serene equilibrium. It was a machine specifically designed to conquer chaos. In 1736, H1 was sent on a trial voyage to Lisbon. It performed magnificently. On the return journey, the ship's captain calculated their position by traditional methods and believed they were near a point on the English coast called the Start. Harrison, consulting H1, calmly corrected him. The land they were seeing, he said, was actually the Lizard, more than 60 miles to the west. Harrison was absolutely right. The clock had saved them from a potentially disastrous navigational error. The Board of Longitude was stunned. They convened for the very first time in their 23-year history, specifically to see Harrison and his machine. This was his moment. He could have demanded the full trial to the West Indies and claimed the £20,000 prize. But John Harrison was a perfectionist to his core. Standing before the most powerful scientific body in the nation, he became his own harshest critic. He told them H1 had flaws. He said he could do better. He could make it smaller, more robust, even more accurate. He asked, not for the prize, but for a little more time and a little more money to build a second, superior clock. The board agreed, giving him £500 and their blessing. So Harrison went back to his workshop. He spent the next 2 years building H2, an improved, more compact version. But by the time he finished it, he was already disgusted with it. He'd discovered a fundamental design flaw in its bar balances that he believed couldn't be overcome. He went back to the board in 1741 and, once again, asked for more time and money to build a third machine. This decision would consume the next 19 years of his life. For nearly 2 decades, Harrison labored over H3, a fantastically complex machine with 753 parts. During this long period, the astronomy world wasn't standing still. The lunar distance method was gaining traction. A new instrument, the reflecting quadrant or sextant, had been invented, allowing much more accurate measurements at sea. A German astronomer named Tobias Mayer, using groundbreaking mathematical work by Leonhard Euler, produced lunar tables that were remarkably precise. The astronomers on the board of Longitude were thrilled. This was the solution they'd always believed in. It was scientific, intellectual, rooted in the grand clockwork of the heavens. Compared to this noble celestial method, Harrison's ticking contraption in a box seemed like a crude mechanic's toy. The new Astronomer Royal, James Bradley, who had once supported Harrison, was now openly hostile. He saw Harrison and his plaguey watch as obstacles to him and Mayer claiming shares of the prize money. Harrison, now in his 60s, was working in near isolation. But during his long struggle with H3, something unexpected happened. In 1753, he had a watchmaker named John Jeffreys build him a personal pocket watch based on his own designs. It was beautiful, but more importantly, it was incredibly accurate. Harrison had managed to miniaturize his temperature compensation ideas into a tiny, quote, bimetallic strip. The watch also had a mechanism keeping it running even while being wound. Harrison carried this watch everywhere. He studied it, marveled at its performance, and a radical new idea began forming in his mind. He'd spent his life building bigger, more complex machines to achieve stability. But what if the answer was to go smaller? What if the solution wasn't a massive sea clock, but a large, supremely engineered watch? In 1759, after 19 years working on H3, Harrison unveiled his fourth timekeeper. H4 was a complete shock to everyone. It looked nothing like its predecessors. It was a gorgeous silver-cased watch, just 5 inches in diameter, weighing only 3 pounds. On its elegant white face, 3 blued steel hands pointed to the time. But its true beauty was hidden inside. Harrison had replaced his complex anti-friction wheels and grasshoppers with something far more radical and expensive: jewels. The moving parts rested on tiny, exquisitely cut diamonds and rubies, virtually eliminating friction and the need for oil. This was his masterpiece. "I think I may make bold to say," he wrote, "that there is neither any other mechanical or mathematical thing in the world that is more beautiful or curious in texture than this my watch." Now, finally, he was ready. In 1761, Harrison's son William was sent on the official trial voyage to Jamaica with H4. The watch was placed in a box with 4 separate locks. William had 1 key. The ship's captain and 2 other officials had the others. Every single day, they would gather to witness William wind the watch. The voyage was a stunning success. On the outbound journey, H4 performed so brilliantly that the ship's captain, initially a skeptic, offered to buy the first one Harrison ever put up for sale. After 81 days at sea, when they arrived in Jamaica, they checked the watch against local time determined by astronomical observations. The total accumulated error was just 5 seconds. 5 seconds. That translated to a longitude error of just over 1 mile. The accuracy was almost unbelievable. The prize should absolutely have been his. The watch had performed 10 times better than the longitude act required. But when William returned to London, the Board of Longitude began to weasel out of it. This is where our story transforms from a contest of ingenuity into an ugly battle of wills, and where we meet Harrison's great nemesis, the Reverend Neville Maskelyne. Maskelyne was everything Harrison wasn't. He was 40 years younger, Cambridge educated, and a devout believer in the lunar distance method. In 1761, at the exact same time William Harrison was sailing to Jamaica with H4, Maskelyne was on his own voyage to the island of St. Helena, successfully testing Mayer's lunar tables. He was meticulous, ambitious, and utterly convinced that the astronomical solution was the only one worthy of a true scientist. Upon his return, he published The British Mariner's Guide, a book making the complex lunar calculations more accessible to sailors. Then, in 1765, after the death of James Bradley and his short-lived successor, Neville Maskelyne was appointed the 5th Astronomer Royal. This gave him an automatic seat on the Board of Longitude. The fox was now officially guarding the henhouse. The board, led by Maskelyne, refused to accept the first trial's results. They claimed the calculations might be off. They called Harrison's success a lucky fluke. They demanded a second, even stricter trial to Barbados. In 1764, William Harrison once again set sail with H4. When he arrived in Barbados, he discovered that the man appointed by the board to be the sole judge of the watch's performance was none other than Neville Maskelyne himself, who'd sailed there to prove the superiority of his lunar method. It was an outrageous conflict of interest. Maskelyne, flustered by accusations from William and the ship's captain, even botched his own astronomical observations. Despite all this, H4 once again performed with breathtaking accuracy. Over the entire 156-day trial, its total error was a mere 39 seconds, corresponding to a longitude error of less than 10 miles. It had succeeded beyond any possible doubt. The board could no longer deny the watch's performance, but they still wouldn't give Harrison the prize. Instead, they offered him a deal. They'd give him half the money, £10,000, but only if he revealed every single secret of H4's construction. And to get the second half, he'd have to oversee construction of 2 more identical copies, just to prove it wasn't a fluke. Harrison was old, exhausted, and felt utterly betrayed. He raged and argued, but in the end he had no choice. In August 1765, a committee of experts, including Maskelyne, came to Harrison's house. For 6 agonizing days, the old man, under oath, dismantled his masterpiece piece by piece, explaining the function of every spring, every wheel, every diamond pallet. Then came the final, cruelest blow. The board demanded he surrender the watch itself. They locked it away in a storeroom at the Admiralty. He'd have to build the 2 required copies from memory, without his own perfect pattern to guide him. While Harrison struggled, Maskelyne was busy. He convinced the board to fund annual publication of the Nautical Almanac, a book of pre-calculated lunar distance tables based on the Greenwich meridian. With this book, Maskelyne made Greenwich the 0-degree reference point for sailors worldwide. He was institutionalizing his own method. Then he arranged to have H4 transferred from the Admiralty to the Royal Observatory for a 10-month trial under his personal supervision. Harrison had to watch as his precious timekeeper was delivered into the hands of his greatest enemy. Maskelyne subjected the watch to a bizarre series of tests, bolting it to a window seat and declaring it failed to keep time accurately enough. He concluded that H4 was a useful accessory for navigation, perhaps useful when cloudy weather made lunar observations impossible, but it could never be the primary solution. The message was crystal clear. The timekeeper was a mechanic's toy. The sky belonged to the astronomers. Years dragged by. Harrison, now in his late 70s, managed to complete one of the required copies, H5. But he knew he didn't have the strength or the years left to build another and endure the board's endless trials. Broken and desperate, he took a final, audacious gamble. He decided to bypass the board entirely and appeal directly to the king. His son William wrote a letter to King George III, a monarch with a keen interest in science, detailing the long, painful history of their struggle. The king was moved. He summoned William to Windsor Castle and, after hearing the story, reportedly muttered, "These people have been cruelly treated." Aloud, he made a promise, "By God, Harrison, I will see you righted." The king took H5 under his personal protection. He ordered a 10-week trial at his own private observatory at Richmond, away from Maskelyne's corrupting influence. The watch was locked in a box, and the king himself held one of the 3 keys, meeting with William and the observatory director each day at noon for the winding. H5 performed flawlessly, accurate to within 1/3 of a second per day. Armed with this undeniable proof, the king went to Parliament on Harrison's behalf. In 1773, Parliament awarded Harrison a bounty of £8, 750. It wasn't officially called the Longitude Prize, but combined with his previous payments, it nearly equaled the full amount. It was a victory, but bittersweet. He'd won not through the official channels of science, but through the intervention of a sympathetic king. The final vindication came 3 years later. The great explorer Captain James Cook returned from his second voyage, a 3-year circumnavigation of the globe. On board, he hadn't carried Harrison's H4, which the board had stubbornly kept grounded, but a meticulous copy made by watchmaker Larkham Kendall, known as K1. Cook's log overflows with praise for the timekeeper. He called it our trusty friend the watch and our never-failing guide. With its help, he'd charted the South Pacific with unprecedented accuracy. He wrote, "Mr. Kendall's watch exceeded the expectations of its most zealous advocate. It would not be doing justice to Mr. Harrison and Mr. Kendall if I did not own that we have received very great assistance from this useful and valuable timepiece." The debate was finally over. The chronometer had proven itself at sea in the hands of the world's greatest navigator. John Harrison died in 1776, on his 83rd birthday. He lived just long enough to see his life's work vindicated. He'd solved the greatest scientific problem of his time, and in doing so, he'd unleashed a revolution. Watchmakers like John Arnold and Thomas Earnshaw simplified Harrison's complex designs, finding ways to mass-produce chronometers. The price dropped from nearly £500 for K1 to as little as £65. Naval officers began buying them with their own money. By 1815, there were some 5,000 marine chronometers at sea. Britannia, it was said, ruled the waves by virtue of the chronometer. Harrison's simple box had given England mastery over the oceans and laid the foundation for the British Empire. Today, if you visit the old Royal Observatory at Greenwich, you can stand on the prime meridian of the world, the line Maskelyne's Nautical Almanac established. And inside, in a quiet gallery, you can see Harrison's clocks. The big, beautiful brass machines, H1, H2, and H3, are still ticking, lovingly restored by a naval officer named Rupert Gould in the 20th century after decades of shocking neglect. And next to them, silent and still, rests H4, the little watch that changed the world. A testament to a man who, in Dava Sobel's beautiful words, wrested the world's whereabouts from the stars and locked the secret in a pocket watch. What an absolutely incredible story. When you first hear about the longitude problem, it sounds like some dry, technical puzzle for mapmakers and sailors. But Dava Sobel reveals it as one of the great adventure stories of human history. It's a story about science, absolutely, but it's also about pride, envy, politics, and the astonishing power of a single obsessively focused mind. For me, the most powerful lesson in longitude is about the nature of genius and the sheer courage it takes to challenge the establishment. John Harrison was a true outsider. He didn't have the education, the the social standing, or the credentials of the men on the board of longitude. They were the experts, the astronomers, who believed the answer had to be as grand and complex as the heavens themselves. Their solution, the lunar distance method, was intellectually brilliant. It required deep knowledge, sophisticated mathematics, and meticulous observation. In their eyes, it was the only respectable path. And then along comes Harrison, a carpenter, who essentially says, "You're all looking in the wrong place. The problem isn't out there in the stars. The problem is right here. It's a problem of engineering, of friction, and temperature, and stability. And I can solve it by building a better machine." This is a dynamic we see again and again throughout history. The experts, deeply invested in their own complex systems, often become blind to simpler, more practical solutions. They mistake complexity for sophistication. Harrison's genius wasn't just in his skilled hands. It was in his way of thinking. He wasn't trying to measure the universe. He was trying to create a tiny, perfect universe of his own, one that could withstand the chaos of the outside world. His clock wasn't a tool for observing the celestial clock. It was the clock. His journey is also a profound testament to the power of persistence. Think about this: 19 years on a single clock, H3. Decades of battling skepticism and outright hostility from the most respected scientists of his day. They made him dismantle his masterpiece. They confiscated his work. They subjected him to unfair trials. It would have been so easy to give up, to become bitter and broken. But Harrison never wavered in his belief that he was right. He had a quiet, stubborn confidence that didn't come from arrogance but from a deep, intimate knowledge of his work. He knew his clocks were true, and that was all that mattered. So what can we take from this story today, in a world where a phone in your pocket can pinpoint your location instantly? First, I think it's a reminder to question our assumptions about where solutions come from. When we face a difficult problem, do we automatically look for a complex, high-minded answer, or do we, like Harrison, look for the simple, practical mechanism at its heart? Sometimes the most revolutionary ideas are the ones that seem almost too simple, too mechanical, too unintellectual. Second, it's a lesson in the importance of true craftsmanship. Harrison won because he was a master of his materials. He understood wood, brass, and steel in a way the astronomers could never understand the moon. He built his knowledge from the ground up, through trial and error, through patient, dedicated work. In an age of quick fixes and digital shortcuts, there's still immense power in that kind of deep, hands-on mastery. So here are a few simple things to think about, inspired by the life of John Harrison. 1. Find your own longitude problem. What's the one big, meaningful challenge in your life, your work, or your community that everyone else thinks is impossible to solve, or is trying to solve in an overly complicated way? 2. Become a true craftsman. Whatever it is you do, go deep. Learn the materials of your trade, whether they're lines of code, words on a page, or relationships with people. Master the fundamentals with the same patience Harrison used to build his wooden clocks. True confidence comes from that deep level of competence. And 3. Don't be afraid to be the lone genius. If you truly believe in your solution, even when the experts dismiss it, keep going. Trust in the results of your work. Like Harrison, you may have to fight for recognition, and you may need to find your own King George, a sponsor or mentor who sees the value in what you're doing. But the world is changed by people who have the courage to build a better clock when everyone else is still just staring at the moon. That was a summary of Longitude by Dava Sobel. We've journeyed through the core of this incredible story today, but I have to be honest with you. A summary is like looking at a map of a beautiful country. It can show you the landmarks and give you the lay of the land, but it can never replace the feeling of actually walking the paths, breathing the air, and experiencing the journey for yourself. The real magic of this book is in Dava Sobel's masterful storytelling, the way she makes you feel the rocking of the ship and hear the ticking of the clock. If anything we've talked about has sparked your curiosity, I truly encourage you to pick up a copy. Reading it isn't just about learning history. It's about experiencing one of the greatest tales of human ingenuity ever told. You can find a link to the book in the description below. Also, if you found this summary valuable and you want to keep exploring the ideas within the world's most influential books, please take a moment to hit that subscribe button. It helps us grow and ensures you won't miss our next journey into another life-changing book from the billionaire's bookshelf. Let's keep learning and keep growing together.